Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it means it's time for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluff Storini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world talking poker with my friends here on the Forums edition of the podcast every Monday night while we steal each other's chips in the free nightly home game. All right, we're going to look at a post from our free strategy forums in a moment, but first I have to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we depend on support from our sponsors and also from our premium members who take part in our training material and study opportunities for only $15 a month. And remember, if you're thinking about taking the plunge out there, you can get your first month for only $5 by using the code RECPOKER at checkout. Here at Rec Poker, we play for fun, but it's more fun when you win. So we study together, we play together, we celebrate together, and it all starts with a free membership at rec.poker, where all it takes to join is an email address and a smile. Now, you get used to hearing my voice on Mondays because they let me host the show, but I am just one man, and it takes a whole group, a crew, a village to make the magic happen here. We call this group of wizards the Wrecking Crew. And if you want to find out more about me or the rest of the Wrecking Crew, you can head over to rec.poker/crew. But you can also just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them right here tonight on the air, starting with our very own producing co-host, Chris Jones.
Well, I am the producing co-host, Chris Jones. You can find me 5v5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the PokerStars home game.
And I'm Rob Washam, and you can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere.
I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_Moss or as Gopherboy TJM in the Rec Poker home game.
And I love it when our premium members come and join the show and add their insights and ask their questions of the panel. This week, I get to welcome back Steve Catterson. Steve, thank you for coming back on the Rec Poker podcast. And where can the audience find you if they want to get a little more Steve Catterson in their lives?
Yeah, so I go by Chip Extractor everywhere on Twitter, X, Instagram, Gmail. And I just want to say I am for sure going to pay the $45 to get one of those cool backgrounds that you guys have, because my blank white just looks terrible in this group.
Well, thanks, Steve. It does look sharp, doesn't it? I can see your face right there with this behind you. That would look awfully sharp. You're not wrong. I look forward to that. Like I said, I love it when our premium members get involved. It heightens the level of the conversation that we have here. And Steve, you'll have to promise to disagree with some of the points that we bring up here so that we can get some back and forth going. I'm looking forward to that. We are going to be looking at a post today from Adam Wolf. He goes by ARW in the forums. And if you're at all familiar with the Rec Poker forums, you know who ARW is. This is one of my favorite posters, honestly. Adam always takes a level of specificity and rigor to his posts that is very impressive. He's got a great head for the math of the game. He knows how to count combos. And he always brings something interesting to the table. Chris?
And he knows how to table select because he's got a fish on his table. So
that's right. It's true. Spoiler, this comes from a cash game in Cleveland, Ohio, where Adam found none other than myself sitting across the table from him. So he's put up the bat signals that, oh wait, Jim's playing live poker within a few hours for me. I got to go get there and scoop some of those chips off that goofball in the yellow shirt. So he wasted no time getting up to Cleveland. And spoiler alert, we had a fantastic time. I always get a kick out of meeting members, and Adam was no disappointment. Very cool guy and great to finally meet in person. So for this table, we're playing 8-handed, and we have a couple notes about other players at the table. I won't really get into, again, I encourage folks, the forum is free. The forums are free. I'm going to put the link to this hand in the show notes. Click on it while you're listening, and you can see all the information that's contained in the post. We're just going to scratch the surface here on the air. But there's a lot of detail here that you might find very interesting if you were going to have a bigger conversation about this spot. So I'm going to leave a lot of those details out. But Adam's in the 2 seat. This Jim Reed character is in the 8 seat. And the main villain is to my left in seat 9, who Adam says is an ABC player and has been winning a lot of pots while playing decent holdings. As at the moment, this main villain is also in the big blind. So Under the Gun limps for $3. This is at a 1-3 table at the Jack Casino in Cleveland. Our correspondent Adam raises to 15 with King in late position. It folds to the ABC player who calls, and I'm guessing that the Under the Gun player, the limper, folds. And so then we get to the flop with the pot of $34, and the flop is 9-7-3 rainbow. Seat 9 checks. We, the correspondent, Adam, bets $20 into a $34 pot, and seat 9 calls. We've got pocket kings. The board is 9-7-3. At this point, I think this is a pretty standard bet. Where we've been checked to, we have a value hand, we have an overpair, we can get called by worse. Is anyone advocating for checking behind? Taylor, you unmuted first.
Yeah, I play less cash. So trying to translate this to some of my tournament standards, one, I would be betting smaller with kings here, but I think the general standard is that cash should kind of go bigger, betting 20 into a pot of 34. Is that about the right size for when we make continuation bets in this spot? I don't know how to comment on that, where, generally speaking, I feel hey, it's all right. But I guess that's my question for you, Jim, or others on the panel. How do we feel about the sizing? Because I think the sizing is the only question here.
Yeah, well, it's a 9-7-3, so they're going to have a lot of pair plus draw hands. They're going to have some 1-pair hands. I think this is a board where when we have pocket kings, we're not nearly as worried about protection as if we had a lower pair or a top pair hand where an overcard is going to come pretty often on the turn of the river. So I think we can size down a bit. That all makes sense to me. I do feel like I'd be betting here very frequently and trying to get called by a 1-pair hand. And we're going to find out if they have 2-pair, because I think we're going to hear about it. And then the only question is, how often are they going to be check raising with straight draw combos and that kind of thing that we'd have to worry about. Rob, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think what we have here is a pretty dynamic flop, even though it's no flush draw. Just because you're ahead right now with whatever your holding is, doesn't mean you're going to be ahead by the river. So, if it was a ace high or a king, say it was a king high flop, it'd be much less dynamic. It would be more static, because anybody with a king is generally going to get to the river and be ahead. So in this particular spot, yeah, I think because of our specific holding, any overpair like this, you don't need to go 20, but you probably want to go 15. You're not going to want to down bet typically. Well, you might want to, but I probably go to about 15, but I don't think 20 is out of the realm either. The pot is small enough right now. And with this kind of holding, don't we want to try to build that pot? And because when you've got pocket kings on this type of flop, you're looking to try to get all the chips in.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are dominating whatever they have right now.
Yeah, Taylor.
Yeah, and there were some comments around them potentially having straight draws here. They don't really have many strong draws here, right? The only thing I can really think of is Jack 10 suited of potentially one of the suits that exist on the board. I don't think they have 8-10. I don't think they have 6-8. I don't think they have 4-5. 5-6, maybe it seems highly unlikely. I feel extremely comfortable with my hand here, and that's where my tournament background to me is hey, I'm betting this really small because I just want to get called, because I want to range bet here with pretty much everything that I have. I'm not sure exactly if that's, the same approaches we should be taking in cash. But like, yeah, to me, there's absolutely no question of a bet here. And it's, we feel amazing about our hand in this current spot.
Chris?
I think they would. I would put them. I'm still agree with you. I feel wildly comfortable with this hand. We're almost never behind, and there's very few cards. We're going to find a card we hate, but we're very few cards we're going to hate on the turn. But I do think they can have some straight draw. I think they'll have a lot of the suited combos as a big blind defense. They'll probably have 10-8, probably 6-8.
Even when he says this player is an ABC player, like to me, when I see that from a big blind where someone that limped and then we raised over a limp.
Yeah, you're right. He's got the end of the gun player to worry about behind him, so he can't close the action. So maybe you're right. Maybe you're absolutely right.
But I want to weigh in there a little bit because the one comment that we didn't talk about the pre-flop sizing, but I do think in cash, particularly in live cash games, sizes expand compared to what you're used to playing in tournaments, particularly online tournaments. Like when I'm playing 1-3, 15 is a pretty common open at the tables that I'm playing. So if someone limps for 3, I'm probably raising it to 20. But it doesn't really. That's not really what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is when he makes it 15 here, I think the big blind player is going to continue a lot with some of those 8-6, 10-8, Jack-9 combos, because the absolute dollar, they're still getting for them, it's just like calling an open. Even though they don't get to close the action, we just don't see a lot of limp re-raising in the 1-3 streets. Yeah, Taylor.
Even someone that gets labeled as ABC, I'm very much stuck on the fact that it says ABC player. And to me, that limits all those types of things. I totally get what you're saying with the sizing and the standards there. But the ABC portion of this to me is what I think makes this person's range very tight. And versus that range, I think 9-7-3 is an absolute whiff for them. Granted, they have some one pair combos, but those are the types of things that we want them to have. So in our current stance, I feel like this is just a jackpot flop.
Yeah, that's a good point. Here, Steve, what do you have?
I have a question about the pre-flop sizing. In situations like this, I tend to overthink the spot in that the under the gun limps. I have a strong holding. I'm under the gun 1. I can go large because I'm going to get calls here. But I also wonder how much I have to consider what he thinks my range is when I come over, when I put in a big raise, relative big size raise to an under the gun limp. So I don't know where that fine line is, but I'm probably in this specific game, I'm going bigger than 15. I don't think it's much more than 18 to 20, but I do think there's value there. I just wonder how much weight you give to the idea that when you take sort of exploitative lines, how much they're going to be understanding that you're doing this exploitatively, going larger, because the under the gun limp range should have a decent amount of calls. I mean, first of all, he shouldn't have an under the gun limp range, but I mean, if he's going to do that, right, you expect more calls than sort of if it was a cutoff button type of thing,
Yep, I think that's true. My short answer to that is the more thoughtful my opponents are going to be about my deviations from my default positions, the less I'm going to deviate. So when I kind of choose to, it's already going to be with an opponent in mind who's not going to read enough into the difference between 15 and 20. That being said, I think for this one, I'm probably raising to I think 18 to 20 feels like the right range, the right size. With most of my raising hands anyway. I don't think we're even exploiting by going larger with kings here. So much as when we choose to do this spot, I'd make it more than 15 because it does feel like we're giving a very good odds for that player to call. And players that limp like to call, right? Like you said, Steve, we're going to see more calls from players that are taking this limp line because they're kind of putting a sticker on their forehead saying, I like to play passively and to see flops. Chris? I'm
honestly shocked that the under the gun player isn't in this hand. That's the part that,
because then the button, when the big blind calls, what better situation? And what kind of hands are you limping with that you don't want to go multi-way with? So I'm with you. So I think one thing, maybe we make a note about that under the gun player, that they're not limping thoughtfully, and we should be raising more frequently with the kind of hands that we might not ordinarily take that line with. So we did find a couple rabbit holes already. I really like Taylor's point about the ABC player not having a lot of straight draws here. I think they're going to have more than that. So we'll come into that with those two different parts of the camp. Maybe give them half the combos or something like that. But so here's how it goes. So as played, we bet 20 on the flop. They call, and the turn is an ace. So it's really the one card we didn't want to see. I guess we also didn't want to see a 9 or a 7. And some of us didn't want to see 6s, 8s, or 10s more than the others, but like those are in there. But this is a pretty brutal card for us. The under the gun player checks, and it's to us who's betting and who's checking here and why. Taylor?
I'm on team bet. I think with this turn ace, we're not scared of too many things outside of 2-pair combos. And 2-pair combos are very much a thing. Because they have ace 9, ace 7, ace 3 that all like play this way, where they're going to check call the flop and then they hit their 2-pair, and now we're potentially worried about that. But they also have like single 9, single 7, singles 3s. Probably a little bit less so of some of those other ones, because all those kind of like all the 3s they have are like ace 3. But anyways, before you're going too crazy there.
Sure.
My approach on flop was like range bet flop, which this turn is a great turn card for our range bet. Not our exact holding, but our range, because we have a lot of ace highs that are just trying to like take it down there. So I feel like this is another spot where like our range is really strong and it constitutes another bet. Again, I'm a tournament player. I'd go relatively small here. My first inclination is we went 20 previously, maybe go 35, somewhere around there, and kind of see what happens. And then if we get called on the river, depending on the river, I'm likely checking behind, but that's just because I'm assuming that they're going to have a relatively tight range once they call flop and turn. But I'll stop there. I'm on team bet for the turn.
Chris?
I'm definitely on team bet too. I think we're deep stacked. We have room to make, and I like the idea of going smaller too. There's not much that if we had an ace here, we'd also probably, I think, be going small. We're targeting hands like 10-9, Jack-9, the kinds of the holdings that we would like them to have if we have an ace. And they're going to have a tough decision here, even to a smaller bet. They might call, but they're gonna not really love it when they get to rivers, because they're not going to know where to go with those kinds of holdings, especially as the hand progresses. The other thing that betting does here is it, there's this tournament player, Sean Winter, who almost always, and he does things a little differently than a lot of but he's a top world-class player. And one of the things I've noticed him do all the time is keep his options open on hands like this, where when we check here, it's really limits ourselves on rivers. And when we bet here with some of the hands like 10s through kings here, it gives us a lot of options on rivers that we wouldn't otherwise have. And I think for that reason, and by the way, I think we can get called by worse when we make a bet here as well. That's another important thing to point out. They don't always have an ace we don't love to see the ace. They can certainly have aces in their range. But when they raise they can't raise that often. When they do raise us, it's a pretty easy fold too, which is another reason why I like this bet. This is a bet fold to a raise. I think there's a lot of good reasons to bet here.
Yeah, and if they were going to be bluff raising, they had a great opportunity to do it on the flop when they had the open, when we, maybe a straight draw or something like that. And those players don't typically then choose to, when the ace comes, to then pull that check raise bluff, because like Taylor's saying, that ace helps our range out a lot. Rob?
Well, if you think about it, we made that range bet on the flop. And I think Taylor mentioned this too, that we have all the aces. We have all the ace kings.
Mm-hmm.
We have the kings. They're capped. They're definitely capped because they didn't raise pre-flop. So they don't have any of that big stuff. Now, if they have a small ace, like say they have something like ace five, we bet here and they could easily fold that, knowing that we have all the ace kings, ace queens, ace jacks, all of those big hands that they don't have. And we came out betting when the ace came, so we're not afraid of the ace. And we're gonna be representing all of those big hands that they can't have. So we could even get a hand as strong as ace five on this flop to actually fold.
Yeah,
so
we
I
definitely
think there's so much benefit to betting here. I think you have to bet here. And I like betting small. I don't know that we're trying to get it all in anymore. I mean, we started with an SPR of must be close to 10 here, right? Because we started with 300, probably a 300 big blind stack or $300 stack. Is that right?
Yeah, we would have started with
about 100 big blinds.
I'm guessing that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't say. So I'm guessing that they each had about $300 in their stacks at least. So, yeah, I don't think we have to try to get it all in anymore, because we could definitely be behind some things, but we definitely want to give them the opportunity to fold a better hand.
Yep. I like that. Steve?
So I have a question about sort of this check back on the turn. And I think everybody agrees that it's a bet and probably a smaller sizing is the best choice. But I wonder if you exploitively check back in spots like this against certain types of opponents. Obviously, the ABC opponent is not someone you're going to do that with. But do you ever exploitively in a cash game check back a spot like this and allow an aggressive opponent to sort of fire the river and then, snap off? Because I find in some of the more aggressive games I play, especially if it's sort of like a semi-private game, that people will fire that river when it's checked back on an ace high turn card.
Yeah, I like to refer to that as a value check, where you're checking to induce a bluff. And that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. Well, actually, yes. Let's get to that in 1 second, unless anyone else wants to jump in on that right now. The one thing that I want to just highlight here is we have to think about the difference between our range and the cards that are actually in our hand. And Taylor brought this up. Like, this ace is very bad for the exact hand that we have, which is pocket kings. But it's actually really, really good for our range. And there are certain opponents against whom you play your range, and there are other opponents against whom you play your hand. I think an ABC player, you should be playing your range against, because they're going to be reading board textures. They're going to recognize that the ace is good for your range. And that is, sometimes we say that if you're playing against a less sophisticated player that's not going to read those cues, you can kind of play your hand. This does seem like a spot where we should be playing our range against a thinking player like this. But it's difficult to do, and we've all been in this position where we've got pocket kings and the ace comes, and we gotta get trained into thinking like, oh, the bad thing happened, and now it's time to just shut it down and not pay off an ace. But I like the way Chris is talking about the other hands that they can have, and you can actually still be value betting kings here. I think that's true. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, last week we talked about the idea of sometimes taking passive actions don't necessarily make hands easier.
Yes.
I think this is another instance where that is true, where yes, and sometimes turns, like we can get death cards on turns, right? And there is times where we want to check back and we want to shut down, but we've still got value here that can beat a lot of their holdings that continued on the flop. we don't need to just always just shut it down when a bad card comes, because I think we leave ourselves more options, and against a player who, if they're noticing these things, they're going to be able to punish us on rivers if they recognize what has happened here. Like if they just see, okay, we bet and then we shut down, and then after the ace comes, that's and not much changes on the river. It's a pretty easy line for them to take to get us to fold hands like kings, queens, jacks, tens.
Yeah, and I also think that we can fold comfortably to a raise on the turn here.
Yes.
We don't have to really worry about, are we getting exploited? Are they doing it with bluffs? Because again, they had that opportunity on the flop and they declined. So usually when you get raised here, it's going to be by a hand that has one pair beat. Taylor, and then
just to add to that, if we get called on the turn, we have a really easy shutdown on the river. We're in position, so we can decide to check back. It's not a spot where we'd be out of position and be worried about, hey, well, if I check river here, am I going to get bluffed off the hand? No, they're going to be in a spot where they have to decide, do they want to lead? And usually when they do, that's your indicator that you're no good. And when then they check to you, you get to check down and show your pocket kings at showdown, because you do have showdown value there. So rivers are going to be very easy once we make this turn decision too.
Steve?
I want to just pick your brains for a second about the sizing on the flop that we chose and how that sort of impacts this ace on the turn. We should have, since we sized up, which I don't think we really did, but since we went a little larger than half pot, we should have cleaned up some of those sort of rogue aces on the turn. Mm-hmm. My question is, not to change this actual hand too much, but if we had made a smaller sizing on the flop, be it half pot or third pot or quarter pot, does that impact how you think about this ace and how it interacts with his range that he carries forward to the turn against a smaller sizing?
For me, sorry, Taylor, go ahead.
Oh, no, you can.
For me, short answer, yes. Because the smaller our bet, the more of their range that calls it, the wider the range that gets to that next street. And I think those kind of ace high hands would be some of the ones that were affected that would be elastic to the size of the bet. I haven't done the range construction in my mind, but those feel like good candidates for hands that might call a small bet and fold to a larger bet. So it would affect the number of combos of aces that they had when they get to the turn. Taylor?
I'll just go back on mute. That's what I was going to say. No, seriously. Like when we bet smaller, we have a wider range, and the wider range is going to include all the aces, which keeps our range strong. If we go bigger, that's really like signifying like overpairs or sets or top pair combos. It doesn't really signify like the ace jack offsuits and the ace tens and stuff like that. So we have a less credible turn bet when we go bigger on the flop. So yes to everything Jim said.
Woohoo! Taylor's a smart player, so I like it when he agrees with me. So as played, it did go check on the turn, and the river is a 9. So again, the board is let me see, what was the actual flop here again? I want to make sure I get this. 9-7-3 rainbow. Yep. And so it does pair what was the top card on the flop. And seat 9 leads for $100 into a pot of $74. So there's probably a little more than 100 behind at that time. Again, we don't know exactly what the chip stacks were, but I think between 200 and 300 seems reasonable for starting for this. The question is this always a fold? Chris, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about the river generally.
Well, this is about the worst card in the deck.
Right.
This is an overbet, and we've been told this is an ABC player.
Mm-hmm.
I can't fold fast enough.
Yes. And there's some good comments here in the forum post. Again, I'll encourage folks to check this out. Just click on that link in the show notes. We get a comment from Eric Jin, who goes by Binkley. He says, I would fold here. Profile is this is an ABC player. When an ABC player tells me that he has a big hand, I should believe him. Ace X could float the river. There's a lot of 9X in villain's range that gets to the river. Would villain, and this is the point that I really like coming from Eric, would villain play queen, queen, the strongest hand that we beat, this way? My answer is no, and I'm folding, which is a really good thought experiment to be playing there. Rob, what's on your mind?
There's a old poker player that always says when they bet on the river, they always have it.
Particularly when they lead into you, right, Rob? That's your
Exactly.
they always have it.
Exactly. They always have it. This is a 1-3 game. It's very low level, recreational. When somebody bets big over the pot in this type of game, you're not making very many mistakes by folding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Taylor?
Yeah, I kept track of one of my summers in Vegas, and I was like, how many times when my opponent led into me on the river, did they have it? I literally kept track. It was every time they had it. I did it. It was true. The only thing I want to say here that I get it, but I do disagree with is Binkley's comment of would they bet queens here, and trying to use that as the deciding factor. They've gone polar, and they're going to have high value, and they're going to have bluffs. Queens is never making this bet. It just really isn't. So to me, that's not what we should be thinking about. Is instead it should be, are they ever taking Jack 10 suited and betting this on the river because they sense weakness, and this is a scary board for how we've played it in this situation, and would they ever be able to find some of those bluffs? I'm not worried about them either value betting or bluffing with queens. I just don't think that ever falls into those situations. So I don't want people to kind of take that thought and be like, okay, cool, all my river decisions are easy. Can I beat the next possible best hand? And if that is true, then I should call her, then I should fold. It's really about their bluffs that they have in this spot, because you're trying to beat bluffs. And to Chris's point, when he said this, it's an overbet. It's an ABC player, and they're leading into us on the river. This is just a very, very low probability of a bluff spot. And then that's making me fold this. Honestly, if I had ace king here, I think we have a tough decision. And then I might even find a fold in this spot, because literally they always have it. What did we define their range as? A lot of nines, potential ace high floats. They bet huge here. It's consistent with a 9 for a story. So I'm over folding here with even my aces, not ace, but
no,
ace
but with
and
your
something
pair of
else.
aces. Yeah. Steve.
Yeah, another example of the turn decision making our river decision harder. So it's sort of we bet turn, and then the 9 falls on the river, or let's say we get called, the 9 falls on the river and we get led into. I mean, you could just light those cards on fire and throw them in.
Yeah.
So, but with the check here, now we've sort of opened up at least some ambiguity on what he may be doing, which just makes our decision that much more difficult. So it's hard. It's hard, I think, at times to not focus on sort of this facing $100 bet decision on the river, but you need to maybe back it up a little bit and say, okay, how did I get here? Not what do I do when I'm here? Because that'll be better to sort of help you avoid putting yourself in these spots.
Yeah, that's the one last point that I was going to raise here, which is when we do check back the turn, we do weaken our range. That does kind of induce some bluffs from some opponents. Even if they would have declined to take those bluff spots earlier in the hand, now that we've kind of told them that we don't have an ace, or that we don't even want to play a big pot when an ace comes on the board, that really does cap our range. So they have new information. And even though I was discounting this player bluffing on the turn because they didn't bluff on the flop, when we do check back, that does open the door for some of those bluffs that might not, it's the river. So there are no more semi bluffs, but they're going to have some hands in their range that they could turn into a bluff there. We're not going to know which ones they are. So the real question is this the kind of player that's going to go pulling for some less obvious bluff candidates on the river? ABC players don't tend to be those kind of players, which would predispose me to a fold as well. But we did make our lives a little trickier and harder by not betting the turn. Steve, do you have one more thought there?
Yeah, just one last question. Does $100 sizing on the river give you pause? Or do you think that just his range is just so incentivized to go polar like that it doesn't, in other words, he's just doing the right thing? Or does $100 sizing give you pause? Because I think in a live game, it would take me a second to not overreact or give too much credence to that sizing can't be for value.
Mm-hmm.
And so
and
I'm
it's
sure I
interesting,
find
like,
a fold, but yeah.
No, but that's a good point, because also that seems like if they did have a 9, that would be the kind of sizing I'd use to target an ace. But we've told them we don't have an ace. So if it's a value bet, what is the target? Chris?
Yeah, and I guess it depends how we're I mean, I think there's different kinds of ABC players, but I do think there is an ABC player that sits there that is not really cognizant of much beyond reacting to that 2 cards in front of them and betting according to the value of the 2 cards in front of them. Mm-hmm. So I have not seen very much from you. I now have trip 9s. I would like to get paid as much as humanly possible for my trip 9s is, I think, how there are some players who would approach this spot, not thinking like, whoa, what's going to call me in this situation? That's sort of like another layer beyond. Now, there are players, I think, where this kind of sizing, where I would just be like, come on, like there are spots here where I think I could, against certain players, where I would find a call with kings, but not as described here at all, ever.
Yeah. And you'd need to, it sounds like what you're saying is that you'd need to have an indication that this was a certain player type that was going to do that a non-trivial percentage of the time. And we just don't have that. We just don't have that information here. All right. Well, a fantastic post from Adam. Thank you so much, Adam, not only for your company on my recent trip to Pittsburgh and Cleveland, but also for all these fantastic posts in the free Rec Poker forums. I'd encourage our listeners to go check them out. All it takes is an email address and a smile. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I love when we have premium members coming during the show. And I want to reinforce to our listeners, a lot of our Wrecking Crew members offer coaching with our members. If you go to rec.poker/coaching, you can take a look at all the different Wrecking Crew members that like to work one-on-one or in a group with our members. And just like you can see from the conversation tonight, there's a lot of different ways to approach these problems, a lot of different ways to talk about poker, a lot of different ways to learn, a lot of different ways to teach. So go to rec.poker/coaching and peruse all the smiling faces there. And I think you'll find someone that speaks your language, someone that can help you think about poker a little better. And I'll just say, I wish I'd done it earlier. I don't know about the rest of the panel, but I learned poker in a silo, reading books and watching videos and listening to podcasts. I didn't get help. I didn't share my thoughts with a lot of people. I was kind of private and loner about it. And I missed out big, man. Like, I know I like to think I progressed as a player on my own, but I could have done it faster by getting help from other people. And I could have reached greater heights, not only more quickly, but just absolutely by having my assumptions challenged by other players, by having them just show, kind of shine a light on the path ahead and help make my own road a little easier. So nothing wrong with getting some help, especially for a game as complicated as this. I'll just say it one more time. Head on over to rec.poker/coaching and see if there's someone there that can work with you. All right. Well, my thanks to Steve Catterson for joining us here. Thanks for your support, Steve, and looking forward to getting to know you better. We also had a contribution from Eric Anderson, a longtime premium member, posting in the chat. So thank you very much to him. Thank you to Adam for his fantastic post in the Rec Poker forums, Rob Washam, Chris Jones, Taylor Moss, of course, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and you, the listeners. We couldn't do it without you, so thanks for listening along, and we'll see you next week on the Rec Poker Podcast.